I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're attempting to link the fire, restore the Elden Ring, and ascend to become Slug, as we rank the final bosses of Soulsborne from worst to best. Interested in the opposite of this topic, the first bosses of Soulsborne ranked? Check out my video on the topic from last week, link in the top of the description. For this video, I'm only looking at bosses that once you beat them, you're able to end the game and trigger the credits. For Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, and Elden Ring, this is pretty straightforward, as they all only have one set boss before the credits roll. While for Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Sekiro, these games have multiple endings, so multiple bosses that need to be included on this list. Naturally, no final DLC bosses will be included here, so no Gale, no Manus, no Orphan, etc. And while I will be going somewhat into the detail of these fights, note that I have already done boss rankings of every single Soulsborne game on my channel, so if you want more information, more detailed information, consider checking out a whole host of my old Soulsborne ranking videos. Let's jump right in. All 11 final bosses in Soulsborne ranked, in my opinion. So let me know your favorite boss and why down below. In my last video ranking the first bosses in Soulsborne, there was a vocal part of my comment section that took it upon themselves to be overly technical regarding what bosses are considered the first bosses in a Souls game. Stuff like how in Dark Souls 1 with the Master Key, you can reach the Butterfly, the Gargoyles, Quelaag even, before the Taurus Demon, or how you can reach Lady Butterfly before Gyobu in Sekiro. I specifically went for choices in that video that the majority of the player base had experienced as their first boss, reflected in the achievements for each game. I know most of you guys are cool, and this message isn't meant for anyone genuinely engaging in my content with meaningful discussion, debates, or corrections, as I do get a few facts wrong here and there. But because I don't want to deal with the pedantic side of the fanbase this week, I am going to be technical. So it's on the fault of those commenters that for Demon Souls, I am not including False King Allant on this list. He's a great fight, probably would have made it fairly high up. I actually prefer him to Gwyn's fight in Dark Souls 1. Yet as per my rules, the final boss of Demon Souls is technically True King Allant. This fucking blob found beneath the Nexus inside the Old One. What to say about True King Allant? He's a blob. Beneath the Nexus. Inside the Old One. Having been corrupted by the demonic power of its host, he's lost his humanity, his shape, and all that can cure him is a claymore to the face. And as far as the fight goes, it's simple. His attacks are slow, they hit hard, but will they ever actually hit when you're actively dodging or blocking? No. It's literally the easiest fight in the game. Lore-wise, this is a satisfying conclusion to Demon Souls and King Allant's story, and I do take lore into account with these lists from time to time. But come on, it's not enough to save this footnote of a fight, especially compared to the rest of the final boss roster of Soulsborne. It's so clear which battle they intended for Demon Souls to have as their remembered final one. At the end of the day, I make these videos out of the joy I have for Soulsborne. I've always engaged in healthy debate with the topics I talk about, and I do actively encourage it, as long as it stays respectful, of course, and we don't flood a comment section with tons of nitpicking. Much love to you all, I had to get that off my chest. On to the next entry. Cracking the top 10, we have a boss whose lore is some of the most fascinating in his game. Yet his boss fight just does not appeal to my sense of enjoyment in the slightest. It's Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin, and one of the two potential final bosses of Dark Souls 2. Encountered throughout the game, Aldia will consistently challenge the player for their motivations, watching your journey as you progress through Drangleic. Though he'll only appear as a boss if you first kill Vendrick in the Undead Crypt. Once the king is slain, Aldia will then appear to challenge you following your fight with Nishandra at the Throne of Want. Firstly, let's discuss the actual fight. Aldia has the fun mechanic of being invulnerable to attacks for most of the battle. If flames are raging around him, you can't hurt him, and if you're too close, you'll take fire damage. So instead, you have to dodge his flaming projectiles that he slowly sends your way until he either teleports or lets his flames down. When he reappears from teleporting, he creates a small explosion, but then he's briefly vulnerable to a mace to the face. Other attacks include charging a larger fireball that I personally decided to tank in order to get more damage in, as well as the ability to thrust vines up from beneath the ground to spear you. It's interesting as a fight in the sense that it's very slow, very methodical. Perhaps I'm just used to everything else in the series being faster, but for me, it's slow to the point of boredom. The best way to describe Aldia's fight is that I can tell it wasn't in the base game for Dark Souls 2. There's just something about it that stands out against the rest, but not for good reason. Which is a genuine shame because Aldia is perhaps the most important character in all of Dark Souls 2's lore. The tragedy of Aldia attempting to find a way to end the cycle of light and dark with his experiments, wanting to shed the yoke of fate, only to find himself removed from the cycle entirely while it continues on for everyone else. He gains immortality, forsaking his soul, but at the cost of being unable to truly affect the world around him. That hits, man. I don't believe you kill him in his boss fight, but that instead he just accepts you've made your choice and relents. I should do a lore ranking one day, then I can really deep dive into researching these characters. But for people still confused, Aldia is W.D. Gaster from Undertale. Another case of lore trumping the actual gameplay, we have our first of 3 Bloodborne bosses on this list, the Moon Presence. The great one that sets the events of the game in motion, the true power behind the Hunter's Dream that sends you on a wild goose chase through Yharnam, all so you can kill an invisible baby. You get the option to fight this bad boy if you take the right steps. Consume 3 of the 3rd umbilical cord items, and you'll be able to resist the Moon Presence's surprisingly strong hug, angering the creature and causing it to go into a frenzy. It's a shame then, for such an awesome design and such a unique way of accessing the fight, that the actual battle is a bit of a letdown. The Moon Presence has a surprisingly shallow amount of health for this point in the game, and its damage output also isn't anything to write home about. It scrabbles along the flower field, attempting to slash and swipe at you like a cornered animal, and at this point you've faced however many beasts, so you should have the experience to avoid damage. Its main ability in battle though is its large AoE cry that reduces the hunter's HP down to 1. However, the Moon Presence then takes a good 6 seconds to recover from using this ability, which is more than enough time for the player to pop some blood vials and get some hits in. So this move actually harms the Moon Presence instead of helping it, especially when it comes to me and my massive Kirk hammer. It's such backwards design, especially coming off of another fight that is going to be much higher on this list. It also has this one move that allows it to throw blood at the player in close proximity, but I won't lie, I killed the Moon Presence so quickly I have no idea how that move even works. It just feels a bit anticlimactic that you've challenged a great one and then this is the fight it puts up. From a lore perspective though, it actually makes sense. You're challenging the Moon Presence for the Hunter's Dream, and when a person wishes to become Slug, nothing will stand in their way. And with the power you've gained across the playthrough, it makes sense that your Hunter has overcome every trial, and thus taking down one of the beings controlling this universe, well, piece of cake. I do need to know who styled Moon Presence's tentacle hair though, it's on fleek. We've still got a few entries to go before we reach the creme de la creme, but I just have to say, good on Nishandra from Dark Souls 2 for not being in the bottom 3, because my god, I have ragged on her fight for many a time in my life, yet here she is chilling in what I'd consider to be the neutral zone of this video. The Queen of Drangleic, awaiting someone to take the throne of Want so she can spread the power of darkness throughout the land, she sends you, the Bear Seek Lest of the Curse, to visit her hollowed husband and take his place as this land's king. And once you arrive at the throne, defeating the Throne Watcher and Defender, she glides in, strutting down the catwalk of evil, and fingering her scythe in that way cool characters do before they cut you up. It's a shame that her fight, as is the case for these lower entries, doesn't live up to the hype. She utilizes a variety of curse-inflicting orbs that, if you get too close to it, will cause curse buildup. And in Dark Souls 2, curse isn't this instant kill effect. Instead, it hollows you once your meter builds up and then resets. For every extra curse proc, you lose more and more health, hollowing further and further, which is a great way to tie in the theme of Dark Souls 2, which is hollowing. Effectively, Nashandra is a poisoner, but one who poisons your soul. Her actual attacks outside of these AoEs aren't anything to write home about though. She can swing her scythe to attack you, which is expected, but only if you approach her. At range, she uses these curse lasers that I think are fairly easy to avoid. I've been clipped by a couple of them over the years, but when you compare this type of attack to any of the future bosses on this list, you'll see the disparity. Dark Souls 2 is just a slow game, and the bosses feel like they're on 0.5 speed most of the time. For all of Nashandra's desire to defeat you, she doesn't make much of an effort to close distance and attack you, instead forcing you to come to her, and it's just not my cup of tea. Even back in 2014, I thought her boss fight was a bit of a letdown, and my feelings haven't really changed. Her fight was, ironically, perfected by Alana the Squalid Queen in the DLC, who has a very similar moveset, yet is way more dynamic, willing to go on the offensive. Nashandra is mainly carried by her lore being a shard of Manus, as well as the fact that she doesn't have an irritating invulnerability gimmick like Aldia that prolongs the fight. But I don't think anyone's gonna be getting sad that we're moving on from Dark Souls 2 now. Easily the boss most out of place on this list, rounding out our bottom 5, we have Murgo's Wet Nurse. Because yes, technically, Murgo's Wet Nurse can be the final boss of Bloodborne, specifically for the ending where you submit your life to Gehrman, as in this ending you never trigger his fight. So because of that, the Wet Nurse becomes the final boss, as killing her is what triggers the fire in the Hunter's Dream, and access to the flower field where you make that choice with Gehrman. So, in the sense of being a final boss, I think the Wet Nurse has the atmosphere to be intimidating at least, found atop Murgo's loft in the Nightmare of Mensis, and seeing that Nightmare Slain message upon defeating the creature is a moment worth remembering. After all, the Wet Nurse was the only thing protecting Murgo, and once she's slain, so too is the baby. Its cries silenced, your objective at an end. But the Wet Nurse boss fight fits the bill for the bottom half of the list, being a pretty easy excursion. She doesn't do a ton of damage per hit, instead using her fast flurries to do tons of mini hits that rack up if you're standing in the wrong spot. Yet I find her flourishes fairly easy to avoid, and standing behind her as she's attacking tends to break a lot of her combos. The only threatening aspect of the fight, and honestly the reason why the Wet Nurse places above those lower on the list, is her Enrage attack, where she coats the arena in a thick blanket of darkness and begins summoning clones to attack the player. From stretchy-armed stabs to forward-jumping attacks from the mist, these clones are absolutely brutal if left unchecked, and the only way to avoid this attack is to stun the Wet Nurse before she can pull off the spell. I did die to her once in my recorded playthrough during this attack, though admittedly I was also toying with her for a while since I'd gotten her health down fairly low and I needed more footage, so I have to think about how a new Bloodborne player might face her, and I think a lot will panic in this last phase of the fight. Make no mistake, I don't think anyone really considers the Wet Nurse to be a final boss outside of that technicality that qualifies her for the role, but just as a boss herself, she's always had an interesting design. I love the music box OST that plays in the background, and some of her attacks can catch players off guard. Middle of the road feels accurate here. Viewer, wait. I'm not ready for you to go to the next entry yet. My channel is getting closer and closer to my goal of reaching 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. Just look at how many of my viewers aren't subscribed right now. Let's rectify that. Be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future content. Back to the video. Coming in at number 6, we have the duo of Radagon of the Golden Order and the Elden Beast from Elden Ring. As we're ranking final boss fights, and in order to beat Elden Ring you have to slay both of these bosses at the same time, I decided to have them occupy the same slot on this list. So let's go phase by phase. Radagon of the Golden Order of the two halves of the fight is definitely the stronger half. A 1v1 duel against a man who can wield the golden power of the Elden Ring with his massive hammer and penchant for surprisingly agile movement given his statuesque figure. He has a large series of literal light attacks that cause AoE effects on the ground. He has lightning spears because most final bosses in From Software games need lightning spears, and his overall aggression makes him a tough foe regardless of the level you choose to fight him at. He has a really delayed grab that I found myself rolling into constantly, and overall feels like a fight that really needs to be learned in order to succeed at. You're not going to accidentally make it to phase 2 without a lot of skill in your arsenal. I said it in my Elden Ring boss ranking video, but if Radagon was the sole focus on Elden Ring's final fight, it could have been one of the best final bosses in the series, what with the constant back and forth, the main theme of Elden Ring blaring in the background, and of course the big plot twist that Radagon was Marika. So it's a slight shame that they decided to go the Bloodborne route and have the true final boss be an alien slug. However, unlike Bloodborne, the Elden Beast is actually a good fight. Heresy, I hear you say, but I'm sorry, I'm an Elden Beast sympathizer. It did take a few nerfs, though, to get it to that point. Elden Stars at launch was one of the most broken spells in the game, after all. The Elden Beast has a moveset that I think is very learnable now, very well telegraphed, and the presentation of the fight is top-notch. It's like you're in an Elden Ring-style Ash Lake, complete with mystical calm music playing in the background. I especially love the attacks like jumping the rings to avoid damage, or managing to roll through all of its ranged sword swipes perfectly. The only issue the Elden Beast has is its penchant for running away from the player. It's not as bad as it used to be, but having to chase after the boss can cause fatigue if you get unlucky with its RNG. And as alluded to earlier, I think Elden Stars, even in its nerfed state, is a move I just don't vibe with, because I have no idea how to counter it aside from chugging, healing, and praying. The two phases of this fight, while great on their own, just feel very disconnected from each other, if that makes any sense at all, and it really does just feel like two bosses instead of one larger boss. The way I see it, the future entries on this list are the pinnacle of their specific game's boss fights. Whereas with Radagon and the Elden Beast, I have the former as my 10th favorite boss in Elden Ring, and the latter as my 15th favorite. They don't quite overcome other bosses in their own game, so how can I call them my favorite final boss in the series? I'd just be being disingenuous to myself for fans. Fair play to anybody who has them higher on their personal lists though, I can totally understand and I do respect it. If there is a fight that I know is propped up by lore and nostalgia, I'll freely admit that it is Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the final boss of the original Dark Souls. In fact, I can see the argument that Gwyn should be lower on this list, and if I was being objective about my rankings, maybe I'd even agree. After all, Gwyn's fight can go one of two ways. Either you're a parry god and you absolutely destroy him by parrying all of his attacks, leading to a quick and painless end, or you're caught rolling and shielding from his extremely aggressive playstyle as he tries to cut you down without giving you a chance to heal. Or you're me in my footage and you're trying to parry him but you're getting the timing wrong and you're embarrassing yourself in front of thousands of people. There's no in-between with Gwyn, all set to that iconic somber piece of music that has become synonymous with Soulsborne, final bosses, and tragic characters. Because Gwyn is a tragic figure, a man obsessed with continuing the Age of Fire, the age of humanity, linking the flame and sacrificing his own sanity to keep the world alive. surrounded by the Black Knights whose charred armor represents their loyalty to their liege even in hollowing. Lore-wise, Gwyn being so built up in the narrative of Dark Souls only to be the shadow of his former self is such a striking visual, and one that many players have come to respect and admire over the years. He was never intended to be a difficult boss, or a giant wall to overcome, or a spectacle fight. He's a fading flame, an ember that needs to be put out, a whimper at the end of a cold night. His fight has stayed with me in a way I wasn't quite expecting when I first played these games, and I just have to admit, I'm being very subjective with this pick. If you're looking for the epic fight version of Gwyn, we'll get there later, but if you're looking for a narratively satisfying fight that also feels quite grounded in its world and lore, you've got a perfect candidate in Gwyn the Lord of Cinder. His legacy lives on throughout the series. I mean, he kinda invented the Lightning Spear spell, which has become synonymous with the Souls series. Let me know if you think Gwyn is a satisfactory experience in the comments. I genuinely want to know where this communal vibe is regarding him at the moment. From one tragic old man to another, just missing out on my top 3 is the best of the 3 Bloodborne final bosses, Gehrman the First Hunter. Perhaps one of Bloodborne's most tragic figures, Gehrman has been a prisoner of the Hunter's dream since its inception, being selected by the Moon Presence to help foster future hunters in their endeavors. It's his job at the end of the hunt to grant the current hunter their freedom, returning them to the waking world by cutting them free of the dream. And yet, should you refuse this wheelchair-bound man's offer, one of the most intimidating cutscenes in Soulsborne plays. The genuine chills as he casually mentions how he always has to clean up the messes before pulling out the burial blade and announcing,
"Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt."
I've said it in most of my videos, Bloodborne's Hunter vs Hunter fights stay winning, and Gehrman is easily one of the best in the game, with a gorgeous Metal Gear Solid 3 style flower field arena, a melancholic yet grand score playing in the background that's very reminiscent of music found in games like Shadow of the Colossus. The stage is set. Gehrman hits hard, swinging his scythe with intensity and ferocity. His gun staggers, his dodges are fluid thanks to his use of the old hunter's bone, and it becomes a game of trying to break through his defenses before he can parry you and take you down. It's a back and forth of healing, fighting, and avoiding his scythe pulls that drag you towards his cocked up gun. And that's before Gehrman buffs himself in his blue aura and becomes even more aggressive. All of this so we can free him from this hunter's dream and end his imprisonment. He has no choice but to fight tooth and nail despite wanting nothing more than to lose this fight and be freed from his shackles. It's somehow heartbreaking, despite the player not having much of a relationship with Gehrman outside of his creepy doll comments. Yet I think this fight aims for the same melancholic atmosphere as Gwyn's did in Dark Souls 1, but manages to also give the player a true taste of difficulty at the same time. You get the best of both worlds. Gameplay and lore, and in any other list, he'd be in my top 3. But then I look at my podium and, well, let's just show you all who I picked. Taking today's bronze medal, we have the duel fight of Emma the Gentle Blade and Isshin Ashina in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice's Shura ending. To unlock this fight, simply agree to Owl's request to obey the Iron Code and forsake Kuro upon your return to Ashina Castle in the mid-game. Instead of fighting Great Shinobi Owl, you'll face in 2 fights against Emma and then Isshin. And already the strength of this duo fight in comparison to the other on this list, Radagon and Elden Beast, is quite evident. Emma the Gentle Blade was trained in the art of sword fighting by Isshin Ashina, so their movesets contain many shared moves. What this means is that as you fight Emma, you're also learning a little bit of Isshin's moveset as well. So while she may be simple to overcome as you fight her more and more, it's still practice for avoiding attacks that her mentor will break out when his phase hits. But Emma can hold her own. Her sword skills are sharp and precise, as a doctor should be, yet it's her grabs that bring to life her character. She has the ability to warp through time and space to grab you when she feels like it. That is a joke, by the way, her grabs are just very scary. and combine that with some impressive deflections and an aggressive moveset, you really have to perfect her fight to have enough healing to handle Ishin. Good thing the music's a banger. Then Ishin comes out, cradling Emma's corpse. This man on the very end of his tether raises his sword and fights you with the fierceness slay-ass hunty queen of his youth. His first phase should be simple for any player, as it mirrors Emma's quite a bit, and most people are going to experience the Shura ending on a second or third playthrough anyway, meaning you'll already have had practice against Sword Saint Ishin's phase 1, which plays out exactly the same. It's his phase 2, though, that brings him over the edge, as he begins redirecting the Flaming Rooftop's wayward fire into his attacks towards you. Flaming sweeps across the floor, sword swipes imbued with fire, the ability to erupt all the flaming spots in the arena to decimate your health, followed by his signature technique One Mind that would make Waterflower dance blush. Yet it's still a learnable and bearable fight because he's using this moveset that you've been learning from his phase 1, from Emma's phase, all through the fight. It all has a through line. That's why I think this fight succeeds, where I feel Radagon and the Elden Beast fall slightly short. It's just a tightly, well-crafted package of flames and showcases some of Sekiro's best content. But it isn't Sekiro's best fight. I really had to rack my brain for which of these two last fights would edge out the other. In the end though, I decided my number 2 is Soul of Cinder from Dark Souls 3. The final game in the Dark Souls trilogy went out with a bang, with amazing DLC bosses, amazing base game bosses, and for me, one of the strongest final bosses in any game. You arrive at the Kiln of the First Flame, stepping up the hill until you see a single figure, a lone suit of armor crouched near the bonfire. Approaching, it turns to you, stands and readies its weapon. The Soul of Cinder is here to end your journey. And I don't think newer Soulsborne fans will quite grasp just how monumentous this battle ended up being for series veterans, as the entire first phase of the health bar is dedicated to the boss switching between different player build types. Sorcerer, Curved Sword Pyromancer, Spear Wielder, Traditional Sword. It became clear after seeing a flip animation that was used by the player in Dark Souls 1 that the Soul of Cinder lived up to its name, being the soul of those players who came before and linked the fire. These movesets were made up entirely of players from previous games, and that's already such high praise. Of course, some of the movesets are easier to counter than others, a weakness of the gimmick, but none of that matters when you're battling such a cool concept in the coolest version of the Kiln in the series, with an amazing musical score accompanying you. And then phase 2 hits. The piano kicks in and suddenly you aren't fighting the Soul of Cinder, no. You're fighting the soul of Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. The shivers that went down the collective consciousness of Dark Souls 3 players who got here blind, only to be faced with the, at the time, most iconic final boss in the series was mind-blowing. There's a child crying outside because this boss fight is so epic. Can you guys hear that? Amazing. The wombo combo was back, the grab was back, and now he's got his lightning spears too that can rain down from the heavens. But as this is Dark Souls 3, now you have the moveset needed to really fight back. Those tough and fast attacks from Dark Souls 1 are now easily able to be rolled through, showing growth of the series. Yet Gwyn still has his aggressive nature that keeps you on your toes and in arm's reach of an Estus flask to bring your health back up to full. It takes what was considered one of the best fights in Dark Souls 1 and modernizes it in a way that actually makes sense in the lore. Yes, it is fanservice. But nobody ever said fanservice was bad if done well. And while Dark Souls 3 has its issues with fanservice sometimes, in the case of Soul of Cinder, it's a perfect way to send off the Dark Souls trilogy, and for a time, was the best final boss in Soulsborne. Until a few years later, when... To all the people who think I hate Sekiro because I ranked it as my 5th favorite game in the Soulsborne series, explain this. Ishin Ashina, the Sword Saint, is the best final boss of any From Software game, and is 100%, without a doubt, no debate, a top 5 Soulsborne boss fight of all time. Where in that top 5? I'm not saying, that might be for a future video, but suffice it to say, a 4-stage boss fight was not what anybody was expecting at the end of Sekiro. You enter the flower field where you began your journey, and first have to fight your way through a quick phase with Genichiro Ashina. His moveset is the same as his fight atop Ashina Castle, but now buffed with 2 different mortal draw abilities that are admittedly easily dodged through, but can pose a threat upon first viewing. His health and posture is already at its limit though, so it really doesn't take long to whittle him down, and that's when the real fight begins. Summoning his grandfather for a wound in his shoulder from the pits of hell, and charging him with the protection of the land of Ashina, you're forced to fight your mentor figure in the game, despite neither of you truly wishing for this to happen. Yet you're both honourable to a fault, and a fated battle begins. Ishin's first phase focuses entirely on his swordplay, complete with various skills from the Ashina skill tree like the Ashina Cross and the Ichimonji Double. For me, it's a lot of dodging to his side and striking him to weaken his vitality in an attempt to begin building up that posture meter, and that's always worked for me. We're all here for phase 2 and phase 3 anyway. Reducing his first health bar, he slams against the ground, pulling out a hidden spear that becomes his new primary weapon, and it is a beast. The range is, of course, massive. He gains many new attacks, such as extremely large charged wind slices you have to block perfectly to avoid, as well as a large series of thrusts, lunges, a jump attack, and of course some attacks you can Mikiri counter. But then he pulls out a gun. At any point in his combos, he can just fire on you like a mad lad, one of the smartest bosses in Soulsborne for bringing a gun to a sword fight, and making it so you have to really stay on your toes. Phase 3 keeps this moveset, but as the storm rages on and gets worse and worse, Ishin begins bringing down divine punishment with thunder strikes from above. If you know how to lightning reversal, you can break his posture very quickly in Phase 3, but it depends so heavily on your position in the arena, as depending on who has the high ground, you could miss him during the counter or just fail entirely. The arena is wide, so running off to heal is viable, but he can close distance extremely quickly, and you need to enter a perfect flow state to win the day and seal his fate. Nothing feels better than knocking him down and delivering the final blow to a man who honorably accepts his fate. It's gonna be hard to top Ishin in the future.
But look at her, who would want to top
Ishin? And that's another video. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this one's a bit less controversial than last week's one. Hoo hoo hoo, ho ho ho. Next week, I'll be putting up another Soulsborne video. I've got a Zelda video going out on the weekend. I hope you guys stay tuned. Be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future content. And once again, just thank you so much everyone for the support. It's been absolutely crazy this month, and I'm just really grateful. My social media links are on screen now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Blue Sky if you have it. And another massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon for supporting me for the month of October. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Gracias. I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.